Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael.
Morning. Really, I suppose the main question is, will the Fed skip a hike today? We'll find out round about lunchtime. But, and that's really been the main question overhanging the Asia-Pacific markets this morning. The Nikkei, though, is pushing up again, up 1%. Remember, its top was 39,000. That was in way back in December 1989. Hong Kong's up 0.2%. Chinese relatively mixed. We talked a little bit earlier in the week about the Chinese property market. No surprises, not doing very well. Now Goldman Sachs are coming out with other economists saying that this will probably last for the downside to the economy, which is driven by the property sector, will probably last for at least a couple of years. There'll be a big difference between the state-funded side and the private sector side, and what they term as the second-tier cities, and also private consumption of property is actually falling. So big problems as far as that's concerned. However, let's stay with China and talk about Saudi. And Saudi basically is saying, look, you know, the world's changed since the Cold War. This is no longer a fight or a proxy fight between the big powers. It's a multipolar existence is what they want to be, and so that can mean a relationship, as far as Saudi is concerned, with China and with the United States. So that's something which Saudis feel will also support China. China is its biggest importer of oil and also one of its main trading partners as well. And that's according to the Saudi finance minister. He's been saying that this morning. India, growth rate there. Now, the IMF was predicting a 5.9% growth rate for 2023. India itself slightly more modest in its proposals, between 5 and 6% in the next 5 years or so. But basically, the reason this is happening is because a lot of companies are outsourcing some of their activities to India. They're now finding it cheaper than China, and they quite like it. So technical schools are getting a lot of investment in India from overseas investors, as is the bank sector too. To the United States, and a recap there would suggest to me that whilst we got those inflation figures yesterday, which were much lower than expected, about a two-year low on inflation, there will the Fed halt its hikes? Very possibly. Again, we're going to find out. A lot of people actually think they probably will. 95% chance of no rate hike round about our lunchtime so they'll stay within that 5 to 5.25% range after 10 straight raises of interest rates. CPI was, as I said, was the lowest in 2 years, and we're going to get the PPI, which shows manufacturing possibilities and optimism or pessimism later this morning, round about lunchtime today. But basically, inflation much lower in the United States than originally thought. Google. Now, Google's been trying to get its workforce back to work, or at least operate what it describes as this hybrid system, whereby people work from home and also work in the office. Google have been checking what their employees are doing by their badges that they wear. The employees are saying, judge us on our work and not on our badges. Thank you very much indeed. I suspect that kind of interference with workers' lives outside the office may become slightly more. That'll be something certainly which workers will want to deal with as they go on. It's a good talking point, that actually. What rights does your employer actually have over your, in inverted commas, spare time? And in a hybrid week, what in inverted commas is your spare time? Russia. Now then, big business volunteering. Apparently, this has come from companies themselves. This is what the Russians are actually saying, that the oligarchs are going to subject themselves to a sort of windfall tax. Any company which is showing profits of 1 billion rubles or more a year will be suffering. The proposal is 10% of its profits because of falling oil revenues and, of course, the cost of the war. which is hitting the Russian economy. And so, but this is something which apparently, according to the Kremlin, has been suggested by the companies themselves. Just to put this into context, there's going to be a Ukraine recovery conference in London. The World Bank has already put the damage done to Ukraine at $411 billion. You're looking at Andrew Bailey there, or you were. He has been saying that that inflation is proving much stickier to come down at the moment. They're thinking the bank rate will probably 5.75%, 5.76%. By the end of the year. Wage inflation is growing at 7.6%. Wage inflation is that one spiral that's very, very difficult to deal with, i.e. workers see rising prices, therefore pay us more. That's what they're saying. And the UK economy grew at 0.2% in April, down to the services sector. Again, bucking this trend that the IMF had said would happen, a recession. Probably not yet, but it could be that there may be a recession next year in the United Kingdom, and it's extremely likely that the present Prime Minister Rishi Sunak may be heading into a general election with a recession. That's going to be interesting. Oil has bounced back very, very slightly again through those softer inflation figures. And although people are saying the bounce back's probably technical more than anything else, and gold, not so upbeat, really awaits what the Fed says, and of course, perhaps more importantly, what the Fed says next month. That is the global view.
All right, real quickly. I'm happy you talked about wage inflation and all of that. There's something called the Phillips curve that economists normally tout, that talks about the relationship between inflation and unemployment. But it looks as it's defying all the odds here. There's an inverse now. Because increasingly, there's inflation, which says the economy is growing, but there's a direct correlative effect on unemployment numbers and wage, and vis-a-vis the cost of living prices, which is low. So what is really happening in the UK? Because I don't understand the economic dynamics.
Yeah, I think what's really happening is both those things, actually. I think there is wage growth, as given by these kind of figures as well. And also, if people see rising prices, then they want to be paid more. That's what they call a wage spiral. And I think it'll be difficult to counteract that. I don't think the Bank of England is particularly in charge of this. I don't think a blunt instrument like monetarism actually works. Fiscal measures might help, but we have to wait for an election and presumably an autumn budget as well to try to give that kind of help to the UK economy. But yes, things are very tough, as they are in lots of developing economies.
All right, so let's talk about Google and the check of the badge, or perhaps looking at whether it's quality over quantity, reviewing their work from home policy and now saying that attendance would form part of performance review for staff members. Now, obviously, staff members are not happy about this development, as they say that they feel like school children who have been watched as to the attendance. I want to ask you, Michael, again and again, there's that review of this work from home policy following, post-COVID. Can it work? Or are employers going to be anxious to have their staff members present at work? On the flip side on the other side, sorry, just before you respond, on the other side is also, does this also mean the future of work whereby quality is measured rather than just you turning up at work, sitting there, your boss is seeing you're there, but you're not really being productive?
Right. So what I think is this, that if I were employing people, I'd like them to be at work so that I can keep an eye on them. And also I'd like them to be more productive and like to increase the quality of their work as well. That's a given. Why is that such a surprise? I think that Google is handling this probably not very well. And I think the employees are pretty cross about not being able to work from home. Personally, I think working from home is a big mistake. And I'll tell you why, because I think that an office gives you a chance to rub shoulders with people, rub shoulders with ideas, swap ideas around and so on. The hurly-burly of real life, that does not equate to sitting at home facing a computer screen. That's all I would say about that. I would want my workforce in where I can talk to them. I would want them also to be registering high productivity as well. I hope it's not the future of work. It may be, because maybe companies like Google will be saying to themselves, you know what, we don't need those big offices anymore. I think this is happening in big cities. It's certainly happening in New York. It's certainly happening in London as well. I don't think it's the way forward. For me, my experience of life started in the office, and I think that's a very, very important piece of equipment for people to have as they start and continue their working lives.
Well, Michael, let's talk about OD Asset Management. JP Morgan has cut its relationship with OD Asset Management. Before now, Goldman Sachs did, Exane also did. The question is, whatever the moral issues are, should banks have a role over the social values of their customers? And secondly, it's not just OD Asset Management that we're talking about, sexual assault, sexual allegations, and all of that. Before now, we talked about the crisis at the CBI. Is it that within the financial sector in the UK, there isn't enough protection for women working in the financial sector? And what do you think needs to be done about that? Those two issues.
I don't think it's confined to the financial sector. I think that what we're seeing is, because the CBI doesn't just include the financial sector, the CBI includes businesses. It's not just about the financial sector. I'm not denying it. Very, very difficult to prove. Very, very difficult for women to come forward. I feel as though they should. They will get confidence from something like the strictures that have been put on OD Asset Management, because although every claim is being strongly denied by the boss, by the founder of OD, who's now stepped down, again, that's something which the courts will decide. But I feel as though more and more of this coming to light will therefore cause more women to come forward, and more people, could I put it like that, to come forward maybe and talk about the kind of discrimination and the kind of disgraceful assaults that they're having at work, and good luck to them. I think that this is a positive way forward. I think the CBI, if you really want to talk about it, has to reinvent itself, certainly, and there are a lot of other organisations pressing as well. OD Asset Management. I mean, another one will crop up. They have no exclusive right for existence. I feel though generally, if the trend is encouraging people to come forward, that's got to be constructive.
Act as moral policemen over their customers, even when it's just a holier-than-thou, hypocritical, attitude. In the case, for example, of JP Morgan, some people have argued.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I mean, who occupies the moral high ground? Not me. It's a very dangerous place to be.
Anyway, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much. Now, for business updates across the African continent, Rotus Odiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning to all our viewers. Yeah, the stock market was popped yesterday following the break that we had on Monday. Remember, we did say this on the holiday that we're expecting the markets to react to the news in the prior week that central bank governor had been returned. So you saw an absolute barn buster yesterday. 15-year high for the all-share index, over 51,000 points. Year to date, the returns now at double digits already, 13.4. Banking index in particular surging by 8.7%. Consumer goods were up, oil and gas was up, industrials were up. I think particularly with banking stocks, the look down the line is, okay, if you're going to get a difference in monetary policy or the house cleaning that President Tinubu talked about, maybe the cash reserve ratio gets reduced, maybe banks are given more room to run, and so shareholders really like that. For downstream stocks, as I've talked about before, in the oil and gas sector, I mean, you saw OPEC coming out saying that Nigeria's production increased quite a bit. So for upstream stocks, good news. Downstream, removal of fuel subsidies, more profit room for them as well. So the issue now is, can this be maintained? And so the president and his team, they've given positive indicators with what they've said. Now it's for the actions to follow through to keep the markets propped up. So I think the next frontier now is the exchange rate to see what happens there. We move to Kenya. President William Ruto. Kenya, he was in Djibouti talking to Parliament about trade and saying that African countries should rely less on the US dollar when it comes to trade between them. Here's what he said.
Traders from Djibouti selling to Kenya or traders from Kenya selling to Djibouti have to look for US dollars. How is US dollars part of the trade between Djibouti and Kenya? Why? And we are saying that today, Afri-Exim Bank have given us a mechanism where traders in our continent can trade in their goods and services, and the Africa-Exim Bank will settle payments in local currency. That is why Kenya champions the Pan-African payment and settlement system that is done by our own institution, the Afri-Exim Bank. Why, members? Why is it necessary for us to buy things from Djibouti and pay in dollars? Why? There is no reason. And we are not against the US dollar. We just want to trade much more freely. Let us pay in US dollars what we are buying from the US. But what we are buying from Djibouti, let's use local currency.
All right, they always love hearing that we should depend less on the US dollar. Mr. Ruto, or President Ruto, I generally agree with him, but look at this number here. Intra-Africa trade as a percentage of total African exports is just 14%, according to the UN Conference on Trade and Development. In Asia, that's almost 70%. In Europe, it's 60 plus. In North America, I think about 40 to 50%. So you still got a lot of challenges within the African continent when it comes to trading with each other. Arise News were in Abidjan at the Africa CEO Forum. The panel that I moderated, I asked the panelists, what about a unified one African currency? They all didn't want to talk about it. They kept quiet because they said there's a whole lot of political issues there, particularly the challenge between Francophone Africa and Anglophone Africa, and the fact that you've got the monetary union that uses CFA francs in their trade and is backed by the...
How much trade do they even do?
Right.
That they use common monetary union.
That's one.
That's the one.
So the thing is, if and then there's also the issue with it's backed by the euro, so they've got stability there with the fact, and so there's that relationship. So if we want to boost trade, we should look towards getting a singular African currency. The African Union has been on this matter now for 40 plus years. There's also visa issues. If you have a Nigerian flying to Egypt, has to get a visa. A Nigerian flying to Kigali doesn't need a visa, right? So you've got to, the issue with visas, even I'm mentioning travel. If you try to travel from East to Western Africa, you might have to go through Europe. So there's so many of these issues. And by the way, the PAPS, what he mentioned, the Afri-Exim PAPS is a Pan-African payment settlement system. The Afri-Exim Bank would be a mediator in the middle. So if you're from Ghana and Ayo is from Kenya and you want to buy something or trade with her, you will pay Ghanaian cedis. And the Afri-Exim Bank will take your Ghanaian cedis and give Ayo the equivalent in Kenyan shillings so that the trade can be facilitated. But then, what is the unit that you use to determine how many Ghanaian cedis are equal to Kenyan shillings? It's still the US dollar that you use for parity between the two, but it's still a good move to facilitate trade. I mentioned travel. Finally, Emirates and Kenya Airways have signed an interline agreement that allows passengers on both airlines to access more routes that both airlines use. So, for example, Emirates clients or passengers coming from the United Arab Emirates can fly into more East African destinations using Kenya Airways routes. And then on the flip side, if you're in Kenya and you want to get access to Asia, the Middle East, and so on, you can enter using Emirates routes and using a single itinerary. So these are the kind of deals deals that need to be signed in order to facilitate more travel. But then there's still more to be said about boosting trade within Africa and the likes.
I mean, very good point. A very good point you raised. But the question has always been the colonial mindset that we need to break. So it's not that Africa does not want to trade among themselves, but the question is, how can we first break the colonial mold? Even the countries that use the same currency, what's intertrade among them? You're talking about Abidjan. How much trade does Abidjan do with Togo that use the same currency? They still go to France. So things are still imported in.
Yeah.
So that's always the problem. And you're talking about the settlement mechanism, yes, which you still pretty much convert to US dollar. But that's why you have benchmarks. I mean, if you remember the European system, before they had the euro, they had a benchmark, they had a currency band where you know that, okay, for pound to Deutschmark had a certain, ratio range and things like that.
Yeah.
Maybe with that first, as a precursor to not looking further. But the most important thing is the colonial mindset that needs to be broken. Let me throw a shade this morning. Even Ruto himself that is talking.
Yeah.
Formerly, it used to be visa on arrival in Kenya. He has changed? It's harder to get into Kenya now. You have to apply for visa online.
True, but while he was in
even
Djibouti,
him that is talking,
right,
he's culprit of all these problems.
True, but also I should mention that while he was in Djibouti, he also announced he has removed visa, so there's a visa-free thing now between Djibouti and Kenya. So
what about Nigeria and Kenya?
Thank you. So that's
even him that is talking is a big hindrance to the problem, because it was when pretty much recently that thing happened. Formerly, when you go to Kenya, you pay $50, you get your visa on arrival. But they removed all those stumbling blocks.
Look at South Africa.
Look at South Africa.
Nigeria.
But no, South Africa is working as regards. I was in a meeting with some people in South African delegation, and they're saying for business visas now they want to give 10 years to Nigerians.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Maybe you should get people from the South African High Commission.
But they should have removed the visas altogether.
But they should remove it altogether.
So
these problems are colonial mindset. So except we emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, no but ourselves can free our mind. We'll never go anywhere.
Well said.
All right. Okay. So when you talk about unified, that was actually one of the things that came to mind when you talked about the story with regards to challenges with doing business in Africa amongst African countries. And I had to think back on the ECO. What's happening with that? Just in West Africa, we are unable to, they've said by 2027, they're still working towards it, it's still on the table.
Right.
But there are a few issues around even eligibility and being able to meet the criteria set. Only Ghana has been able to meet that criteria out of the 10 countries.
Yeah.
So like you mentioned, yes, it would be excellent if we had a unified currency like we have the euro in Europe, and obviously dollars is not just in the US or American continent, but across the world. It would be really, really good. And then talking about transportation, I think you said this a few days back, that it is actually easier to travel abroad to another continent than it is to travel within the African continent.
Yeah.
And so that has to be sorted. In terms of visa, I wanted to propose that Rufai should be considered for Minister of Foreign Affairs, since he's able to have diplomatic conversations.
If you go on Twitter, Rufai has all types of positions that he's apparently supposed to take. Don't leave us, don't leave us.
Because I'm true to it. We're supposed to be Africa's big brother. We're supposed to have that, the respect. But we keep getting visa restrictions from countries. What is the challenge?
Right.
What are the conversations that are being had on the diplomatic table, and why are we not, what happened in Djibouti that can't happen in Nigeria in terms of conversation or coming to a negotiation with countries that keep restricting visa access for Nigerians? And then finally, where does the African Continental Free Trade Agreement come into play in terms of free trade amongst Africans? Where are we with that?
So you've hit the nail on the head. If you want free flowing trade across the continent, you got to have a currency that allows you to not have to worry about PAPs and so on. So that there's still a ways to go.
Absolutely.
There's still a ways to go.
Okay, the submission by William Ruto, the president of Kenya, is to be seen in two regards. The first is de-dollarization. There's a de-dollarization debate that is going on in the world. The U.S. for more than 100 years has had its dollar as the reserve currency of the world. In that regard, that gives the United States an opportunity to dictate global trade. It gives it an unusual advantage, and it allows it to use the dominance of the dollar to drive its own foreign policy. But in recent times, in the last 20 years, and even more recently, in the context of the Russian-Ukraine war, there are countries that have been saying we need to shift away from the dollar. We have to create an alternative medium. And the countries that are in the lead in this regard are the BRICS countries, Russia, China, India, South Africa, these are countries that are saying, look, de-dollarization would help. But would that succeed? Have they been able to make significant progress with it? So that's the framework internationally. But to bring it down to Africa, well, President Ruto is talking in terms of integration. The OAU, since its creation in May 1963, and then its transformation in 2012 to the African Union, has been talking about integration in Africa. And the big part of it has been trade. How will Africa come together as a trade union? You said we contribute 4%.
14%. Yeah.
14%.
Yeah, that's the trade, intertrade.
Is it to global trade?
No, that is as a percentage of...
To global trade.
Or it's 0.6 or something. It's really
global
low.
trade, we're even way down, where some people say about 4%. But even intra-Africa trade is not working. The basic contradictions will seem to lie in the disparities in terms of growth in Africa. Many of these countries, they are not the same. They are also politically divided, ideologically divided. How do you integrate Lusophone, Francophone, Anglophone, and the Arab countries in the context of a fact whereby
the Arab ones.
Certain global forces within what is called international political economy divide Africa. And our leaders don't even have the capacity to provide the required leadership. So at the level of principle, William Ruto may be saying something, yes, that makes sense. But we should begin with even the question with African Continental Free Trade Agreement. There seems to they seem to have gone quiet on that. How much progress are we making? So it's fine to talk about integration theory, in terms of theory. Africa's place within the international trade economy and all of that. But do we have the will? Do we have the capacity to see it through? Finally, on the question of that you brought up, that you have now returned to, how Emefiele's suspension
the markets,
has affected the markets. Yes. Okay, the question to ask is, the response has been positive, but is it sustainable? Is it something that is actually real? And then we're talking about the stock market and all that. In that story, in that narrative, I was looking for, has the Naira appreciated?
No, it does not.
Because that is the one that ordinary people like us worry about. Not necessarily bonds or stock markets or what the international market.
So your wealth will grow over time. Or buy stocks. Although you're a wealtty man already.
I think it's important to just monitor.
Yes.
To monitor the markets because as we watch, as developments, are unveiled, then we'll be in a more shorter place, to be able to arrive at conclusions. I think it's early yet.
Indeed. Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.